So you want to adopt a child and you have no clue where to start. You don't know what type of adoption you do. You don't know how to do it. You're in the right place, because today I'm going to be sharing 5 ways that you can adopt a child. I'm going to share all the different aspects of each type of adoption so you can figure out which type of adoption is best for you and your family. So let's jump in. If you're new here, my name is Katie and this is my channel, La Casa de Katie, where I do videos about lifestyle, faith, adoption, and travel. But my adoption videos are by far my most popular, so if you'd like to watch more of them, I will link my playlist above. I have videos about our journey adopting our daughter. I have videos about post-adoption depression, videos about different types of adoption and why I think they're good, so check them out. So one thing I want to mention is that for every adoption you do, as far as I know, every single adoption, there's some steps you have to go through. Like, you have to have a home study done, which is basically kind of like an investigation into you, your family, your home, to make sure that you are a safe parent. It sounds very extreme. It's not as intense as it sounds. It is a little uncomfortable because people are gonna come check your home, they're gonna interview you, ask you a bunch of questions, but they're making sure that you are capable of caring for a kid in a safe way. So it's a good thing. I should add a disclaimer here that the types of adoption I'm going to list are types you can do other places, but I am American, I live in the United States, so it's gonna be kind of from a US perspective, because I know, you can adopt internationally or domestically, for example, in England, but I don't know the process. So this is more for if you're in the US. But like I said, today we're gonna talk about 5 different ways that you can adopt a child. So the first way that you can adopt a child is to adopt an infant, a newborn baby, domestically. So the first way that you can adopt a child is through domestic infant adoption. So this is when you are looking to adopt a newborn baby. Newborn adoptions generally are pretty expensive. There are ways that if you are connected somehow with a family, there are ways to kind of get around some of the costs, but most people who adopt an infant, I think the average is between $20,000 and $40,000 per adoption. I know when people hear that, they cringe because it sounds like you're buying a baby, and I totally get that. I will say that there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of paperwork. Oftentimes you're helping pay for the birth mother's like hospital bills. So it's not just like paying for a baby. I know it sounds like that, but there's a lot of different things that go together. Although I will say I think adoption should be more affordable than it is. So like I said, you can do this privately or through an agency. Most people are probably going to do this through an agency, and that is where you'll see some of those fees. And one really unique factor of domestic infant adoptions that's a little different than a lot of other types of adoption is that they are usually semi-open or open adoptions, meaning that you and your adopted child will still have contact with the birth parent throughout the child's life. Now, a lot of people hear that and it really scares them because they think, oh, that's gonna be too confusing for the kid, it's gonna throw them off. But actually, a lot of research shows that it's good for adopted children to grow up knowing their story, knowing their birth parents, knowing things about them, as long as their birth parents are safe people to interact with. And the thing about domestic infant adoption is that these birth parents, it's not like their kids were forcibly removed from them. They chose adoption for their kids out of love for their kids. They wanted their kids to have a good life, and maybe they just weren't in a spot to take care of them. And so, don't think about birth parents as the bad person or incapable of being caring or incapable of being responsible. That's not the case at all. Like, if you ask me, they're making a very responsible choice to allow this child to have life, allow this child to have a life that where they're going to be with a family who can provide for them and can love them in the way they deserve. That's something to be aware of, is that many adoptions are open, and the birth mom actually is the one who selects the family. So the birth moms will work with the agency, usually an agency, and they will get all these books, and you will have to create this book of your family and all this information about you and your spouse, or if you're, if you're single, information about where you live. And so you kind of want the birth mom to look at this and think, wow, this would be a great fit for my child. So I think it's kind of cool in that situation. We did not adopt this way, but I do think it's cool that the birth mom has so much say in where their child is going. Yeah, I just think that that's kind of a cool thing. And like I said, because they're choosing you, they will kind of determine how open they're willing to be. And it's not that you can't have a closed domestic infant adoption, but it's just not as common these days because, like I said, so much research is showing that it's actually better for adopted kids to know more and have a relationship of some sort with their birth parent. In terms of how long it can take to adopt, some people wait a long time, like a year or so. Some people it's shorter. It really just depends on when a birth parent picks you. Another thing I'll say about this type of adoption, and I don't want this to come across like this isn't as much of a need, but I did look up this stat and I included it in another video I posted, and I'll link my sources below. But basically, for every one newborn baby that is placed for adoption, there are 36 families who want to adopt that child. So when you're talking about newborn adoption, a lot of people want newborns because they think, kind of incorrectly, that that kid is not gonna ever be affected by the fact they're adopted because they were a baby, they were so young, how could they possibly know what happened? Well, they might not remember in that sense, but their bodies remember the separation from their birth parent and they have experienced trauma. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people pursue that type of adoption because they want it to feel like as much like their kid as possible. But just know that's not really the case, and there are a lot of people who want to adopt newborns for that reason. So I would argue a little bit that there's more of a need for other types of adoption, but again, if your heart is set on this type of adoption, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I just like to at least push people to kind of be open to other possibilities that they may not have thought of before. All right, next let's move on to international adoption. International adoption, like it sounds, is adopting a child from another country. And actually, international adoption has been on a pretty steady decline in the past several years because there's a lot of controversy around, like, is it ethical? Are best practices being used? Can we trust what's going on? It's just, there's a little more distrust in that area, which I actually don't think that's a bad thing. And while I think it's, terrible that there are kids who are sitting overseas who are waiting for a family and could have a family if more American families or in other countries would adopt them, I also think it's kind of good that we're questioning the ethics of it and we're making sure that it's being done the right way, because I think it's a beautiful thing. We actually originally really wanted to adopt internationally and it's just not how it worked out for our family. I think it is a wonderful thing. I think it's right for so many families, but I also think the ethics thing is kind of important. I will say, this is kind of similar to domestic infant adoption in the fact that it is usually very expensive. The average I found it was again between $20,000 and $40,000. I would say the average I see is like $30,000. Now, unlike domestic infant adoptions, these adoptions are usually closed because having contact internationally is very rare. I have never personally met anyone who's adopted internationally who has contact with the birth family. It's just very rare. Sometimes that's because the birth family has passed away, but actually in most cases that's not true. Many times families feel like they can't afford to raise their kids in countries like this, and so they may put them in an orphanage or something like that because they just can't afford to care for them. Now, if you're looking to adopt a little baby, I would say that international adoption is not the way to go. It's very rare. I know a lot of people think about, oh, China, you can adopt a baby girl and it's very common. That's not quite as common anymore. Usually if you're adopting a kid internationally, they're gonna be older or they're gonna have some sort of special need. They may have a medical special need, they may have a physical special need, a mental special need, but usually they're gonna be older or have some sort of special needs. So from what I researched, if you wanna adopt a healthy infant internationally, your wait could be anywhere between 2 and 7 years. 7 years is a long time. I've been married just under 7 years, and while sometimes it's gone fast, that's a long time. So I personally would not recommend going into international adoption unless you are comfortable with adopting an older child or a child with special needs. And if you are, that could be a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. Two other things I want to mention is that when you adopt from another country, obviously that country's government has their own laws and their own regulations about who can adopt their children, because obviously they care about their children in that country. That's their future generation. So if they're entrusting, you know, foreigners to come take their kids away, they want to make sure that they have specific things in place. And different cultures will have different things. So for example, some countries you have to be married, okay? You have to be married to adopt. You can't be single and adopt from there. Other countries you have to be a certain age, like Haiti, for example, or I think even the Dominican Republic, maybe you had to be like 30 years old. And you know, my husband and I used to live in the Dominican Republic, but we were really young and we were like, well, we couldn't even adopt here if we wanted to. So that is something to take into account. Age plays into it. I've heard that like in China, your BMI, your body mass index, plays into it. So if your BMI is too high, you can't adopt one of their kids. So you gotta be skinny, which I personally think is a little crazy, but I guess if it's like a cultural value, I'm just gonna leave it there. And the second thing is that in terms of visiting your child, meeting them, picking them up and taking them home, all these countries have different requirements. For example, I think like in China, it's pretty common, and please don't quote me on this because I'm not an expert, but from people I know who have adopted from there, I feel like they just like went on one trip, met their kid one day, went back to their hotel, came back, met the kid the next day, took them with them. They might have stayed in China for like a week or two and maybe traveled around, and then they came back with their kids. So it's like a really fast turnaround. Other countries have much slower turnarounds. One of the places that we were really interested in adopting from when we were considering international adoption was Nicaragua. And there, they actually had this kind of intense thing where you had to live there. I think you had to move to Nicaragua and live there for like 3 or 4 months and be fostering the child in country. And it sounds crazy that that's where we wanted to adopt from at the time, but I just looked at that and I was like, that's the best for the child. Like, I just kind of agreed that it was better for the kid to adjust to you in their comfort spot, where like instead of just like pulling them and bringing them into a whole new country, a whole new language, a whole new culture, and just like throwing them into your lives, to me it was kind of a way of showing like you were willing to jump into what they were used to and like have them still be around familiar sights and sounds and smells while they're getting used to you. That's a whole other thing. But like I said, different countries have different requirements, so you're gonna have to make sure you can make that work. Obviously, moving to another country for 3 or 4 months is pretty crazy, and not everyone can do that. A lot of people who adopt from there, they send one parent over and one parent lives there. And now looking after I've adopted in the States and we were both here and seeing how hard it was, that sounds really hard to send one parent there for 3 or 4 months by themselves. I'm not sure how I would have actually handled that in reality. All right, a third way to adopt is to do foster to adopt. So what this is you become a licensed foster parent and you get an adoptive license with that. So you have to go through the home study process, take the classes, all the basic stuff, and then you will get your license. Once you're licensed, you are going to have your home open to certain ages. So there are people who just want to foster babies, okay? Then there are people who will foster up to the age of 5. Then there are people who will foster the age of 10. There are some people who just want to foster teenagers. Bless their hearts, don't know who they are, but some of them want to do that. The crazy thing about this type of adoption though, is that it is either free or incredibly affordable, like $2,000 or less. So there are a lot of perks to this. Like for example, the government gives you a lot of money to care for a kid in the US foster system. Okay, you're gonna see videos all over YouTube that are talking about how much money they get as a foster parent, and they're gonna try to play it off like it's nothing because they don't want to come across as like selfish or that they're fostering for the money, because there are certainly people who do that and it's really terrible. But that money is helpful money to be receiving. It helps you pay for things for your kids, maybe helps you pay for them to do piano lessons or sports or something like that. But that is a pretty nice perk of adopting from foster care, or just doing foster care in general, is that you do get some money per kid per month to help with raising the child. On top of getting that monthly stipend, the government also gives Medicaid for that child, so that their health care is covered. You get a stipend to help take care of them, there are a lot of financial benefits. And then obviously if it turns into adoption, like I said, it's also not that expensive, or it's free. And with this, you can go through either a county or an agency. So we went through an agency for our foster care adoption, but ours was the next type, so I'll get there in a second. But you can go through an agency, or you can go through just the county. And the thing is when you do foster to adopt, it is a long journey. Because let's say that you get a kid, you get a call, and it's like a newborn baby, okay? And this baby was just removed from their parents' care, and you're gonna be waiting for years to adopt that child. Like, you just will. Usually, I mean, at least a year, if not more, you will be waiting for parental rights to be terminated, or for the parent to be able to meet their case plan and be able to have their child back. Which, I just want to be clear, the goal of foster care is not adoption. And I know that that's hard for some people to hear, but the goal of foster care is reunification with families. So when a kid goes into foster care, the county is not saying, all right, our goal is for this family to adopt this kid. No, they're saying our goal is to help this parent, this biological parent, be able to get things together in their lives, to, you know, get a job, or, you know, get off drugs, whatever the situation is, to help them so that they can be a safe parent and have their children back in their home. So foster care is really about keeping birth families together. And so if you go into it with an adoption mindset, it can be a little bit hard, because that's not the end goal. Saying that, I think there's nothing wrong at all with people who want to foster to adopt, like they have the hopes to adopt from foster care, because that happens, you know, happens pretty often, that a kid goes into foster care, and even though the goal is reunification with their birth parents, it doesn't always work out that way. And so then that child does need to be adopted, and it makes sense for them to be adopted by the family who's been caring for them this entire time. So I guess my thought with this is, if you are going into foster to adopt, I think it's kind of about your mindset. I think the best mindset to have with that type of adoption foster care would be to go into it saying, I want to be a safe home for kids for no matter how long. And if it does turn into a possibility to adopt, I would be open to that, and I'd be happy to do so. Instead of going into it saying, I hope I can adopt these kids, you know what I mean? Because that's not truly the goal of foster care. The next way to adopt is also from foster care, but this is slightly different. This is adopting a waiting child. So the first part of the process is all the same. You do your home study, you get licensed for foster and adoptive home, all that is the same. It has the same benefits. You have, you know, the foster care stipend each month, they have the Medicaid cards, all of that is the same. However, you are adopting a waiting child. So this is a child whose parental rights have already been completely revoked. The reunification with the birth family is no longer the plan, because the birth family has either decided they don't want to follow through with the plan, or they were not able to follow through with the plan. And in the United States, at a given time, there are 400,000 kids in foster care. And out of those 400,000 kids, there are 100,000 kids just waiting to be adopted. Their parental rights have been completely revoked, they're just waiting. And that is where adopting a waiting child comes in. So I'm a little bit biased towards this type of adoption, because this is the way that we adopted our daughter, and the way that we will be adopting our next 2 children. So like I said, it's either free or very affordable. You can go through an agency, or you can go through the county. We went through an agency, we really loved our experience, but it did have a cost. It was about $5,000. Now, you do have to kind of foster before you can adopt the children, but basically what will happen is you'll have visits with the child, and then after you've visited several different times, whatever the county that they're in prescribes, then they will move in with you. Once they move into you, have to wait at least 6 months before you can finalize the adoption. Oftentimes it ends up being more like 7 or 8 or 9, just because you're waiting on the courts and everything. And something really nice about foster care adoption, both in the foster to adopt and the next one I'm going to talk about, is that even after you've adopted the child and they are fully your child, the government still gives you support. You will most likely get an adoption subsidy, which is a lower amount than you would get. It's pretty low compared to like what you get for a foster stipend, but you get money each month until that kid is 18 to help provide for that child. You will also still get the Medicaid card usually, and usually, at least it's true in our state in Ohio, that kid can go to any state school in your state for free for college, which is kind of crazy. So yeah, you have to foster the kids for a little bit, but it's actually an adoptive placement the whole time, unless it's like a legal risk adoptive placement, but even then it's very likely that it's going to go to adoption. But what's nice about this is you don't have that kind of, you know, tugging at your heart like with foster to adopt, where you're wondering, I really want to adopt these kids, I love them, they've been in my home for 2 years and I don't know what's going to happen, and it's just kind of a roller coaster. It's more like, all right, this kid has been placed for adoption, they are ready to be adopted, we're just going to go through this 6-month period to make sure everything's working out okay and get some support from people, and then we're going to officially become a family. So I do think that if your end goal is adoption, I think adopting a waiting child is like the best way to go in terms of foster care adoption, okay? Foster to adopt versus adopting a waiting child. And a lot of people are afraid that if they're adopting a waiting child, that child is waiting because there's something wrong with the kid. Like because their behavior's so bad that their foster parents don't want to adopt them, or because they're just really old. But I'll tell you, we were open to adopting up to 4 kids up to the age of 10. That's pretty wide parameters, much wider than when we started, by the way. But throughout the process, we kind of opened up our hearts a little bit, and we were open to that, and we got matched with a healthy 18-month-old little girl who really we didn't have any real concerns about, you know, whether it was like medically or special needs wise. So that can happen. And I actually made an entire video about why I think you should adopt a waiting child from foster care. So I'll link that above, because personally, I think it's a really great way to adopt. And, you know, we had considered adopting internationally. We had considered adopting an infant at one point privately because we had a situation and it didn't work out. But overall, I've been just really pleased with the way our adoption has gone, adopting a waiting child. And I was someone who had researched adoption a lot before we jumped into the process, and that was not a type of adoption I was familiar with. I don't think there's enough information out there on it. So if you've never heard of it, please check out my videos. I'm gonna put them all in the description box as well, any of my videos about that type of adoption, just to help you out if that's something you've never heard of before. And the 5th type of adoption is called kinship adoption. Kinship adoption is when you adopt someone that you already have a relationship with in one way or another. So oftentimes kinship adoption is when a family member adopts a child. So for example, if you have like a brother or sister-in-law or a brother who cannot take care of their own child, you may adopt their child. And so this is actually like the courts prefer kinship adoption over any type of adoption because it still has a connection to the child's life and the child's like biological family. And so that is actually a great route. If you have that opportunity around you, that could be a great thing to do. It's really great for the kid to still have those connections. Sometimes what that looks like is a grandma might adopt her grandkids if the parents cannot take care of their kids well. I know situations, I'm a teacher, I know situations where teachers adopt former students they had because they already had a relationship with them and no one in their family was able to adopt them. And so the courts prefer, you know, someone who already knows the kid. And so a teacher knows kids pretty well. And there's actually a teacher at my school who adopted one of her past students. And I just think that's really awesome. Like, as a teacher, knowing how close you get to your students and how much you care for them like they're your own kids and you just get to know them, I think that that is a really cool way. So if you have some sort of connection that way, that's a way you can do a kinship adoption as well. And that is one that I honestly do not know as much about. I do know several people who have done kinship adoptions. You still have to take classes, you still have to do a home study. I know all of that. So it really is very similar, but obviously you already have some sort of relationship with this child. So in many ways it could make it easier, although I do think sometimes like if it's a family member, those dynamics can be kind of strange or awkward. So that's obviously something to work through as well. And I believe those adoptions are usually very affordable as well. You may have to pay for an attorney or things like that, but it's not like $20,000 like a newborn infant adoption would be. So there you have it. There are 5 main ways that you can adopt a child. And like I said, they all have things in common. Like they all have in common that you have to do a home study. They're gonna look into your past. They're gonna make sure your marriage is stable or that you're stable financially enough to care for a kid. But they're not looking for you to be perfect, okay? So don't let that part scare you. But really a lot of these processes look very similar. The biggest differences I would say would be cost, the amount of time you're going to be waiting, the ages and types of children you'd be able to adopt. Those to me are the biggest differences between them. And so you need to figure out what works best for your family. I just want to be clear that I know that I'm kind of like a proponent of adopting from foster care these days, but there's not a wrong way to adopt if it's legal, okay? Like there's not a wrong way to do it. And so I don't want you to feel like, oh, I'm bad if I really want that experience of having a baby. No, that's not bad. There's nothing wrong with that. There's another type of adoption, embryo adoption. I didn't get into that because I literally know nothing about it, but that is another thing you could look into if, you know, you've been struggling with infertility and you'd really like that option. I know that people do that. I don't know anyone personally who's done it, but I have seen it advertised a lot through different adoption agencies. So that might be another thing you can look into if you're curious. Anyway, thank you so much for checking out my channel. I really appreciate you watching this video. And please, if you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more adoption content. I have a lot of great adoption videos planned for you guys in the upcoming months. And please let me know in the comments what are any other adoption related questions you have. I'm happy to talk with you in the comments. I love when people comment on my videos and I can interact with you guys and hear your story, hear your plans to adopt. Like, it just fills me with joy to hear different people's adoption stories. But also, if you give me good questions, a lot of times I use those questions to give me ideas for what types of videos to make. So if there's a specific type of adoption video you want me to make, write me a comment down below and I'll get on that. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.